What is that willingness again and again to look at ourselves in the mirror rather than placing our dissatisfaction or our frustration at our partner's feet? It is that willingness to say, okay, what's the me part of it?
Welcome to the Get Your Marriage On podcast. I'm your host, Dan Purcell, a Christian marriage and intimacy expert and coach. I'm on a mission to help couples have the best sex and most emotionally intimate marriages possible. Our episodes cover topics you've always wondered about and are packed with practical advice designed to help you take your marriage to the next level. Let's say, hypothetically, and of course this is just hypothetical, your spouse just rejected your attempts at some romance. Again, she's stressed because she's super focused on the kids, and not only that, you see that she has this tendency to overcommit and say yes to far too many things. She signed up for the PTA, to volunteer at church, to help in the classroom with the kids, to take the neighbor's son dishes, and the list just keeps going on. And you know this about her, and you want her to see things your way. So what do? Or let's say, hypothetically, and of course, very hypothetically, your husband has been up way too late again, playing that blasted video game. He crawls into bed after you've been in bed for hours, and he asks if you're still asleep. Internally, you want to say to yourself, what kind of question is that? Of course I am still asleep until you woke me up. But you bite your tongue instead and just roll over. You know what he really wants right now, because that's his pattern. And that's what makes you want it even less than a bucket of ice in the middle of winter in Alaska. So, how do you respond in that scenario? In your everyday, ordinary interactions as a couple, it's so easy to notice how our spouse is making choices that get in the way of them getting what they really want. Our brains expend a tremendous amount of energy trying to get our spouse to see things our way because from our vantage point, they're self-sabotaging, right? If you or someone you love has ever felt this way, then this podcast episode is for you. We're going to talk about relational self-awareness, what it is, how to get it, and how to build a better relationship with your lover. My guest today is Dr. Alexandra Solomon. She is a professor of marriage and family therapy at Northwestern University in Chicago. I recently read one of her books and invited her to be a guest on this podcast. Before we dive in and meet Dr. Alexandra, I want to invite you to check out our Get Your Marriage On program. It's perfect for couples that want to make real traction in transforming their most important relationship. This is for people that want a real passionate marriage that's also long-lasting. This program can help you overcome your obstacles to intimacy that you're facing in your marriage. Over 100 couples have joined and are seeing real results in their marriage. This October is also our couples retreat. Early bird pricing for this retreat ends in July. These in-person retreats are perfect for couples that want to get away to a picturesque and romantic location and replenish their relationship. You'll get to work with me and my team in a relaxing setting. There's also a few videos of those that have attended our retreats in the past talking about what their experience was like on our website at getyourmarriageon.com that you'll want to check out. All right, and now let's go learn more about relational self-awareness. Alexandra, welcome to the Get Your Marriage On podcast. It's a delight to have you on today.
Thank
How
you.
are you?
I'm great. Happy to be here with you. Thank you.
Great. So I heard the story that you married the boy across the hall from you in the dorms. That's how you and your husband met. And it's been about 25 years. Tell me, in those 25 years, what are some of your most adrenaline-pumping experiences you've had? Maybe a time you got in trouble even.
A time I got in trouble. I did. I married the boy across the hall. I met him about 5 minutes after our parents had dropped us off for college, but we didn't start dating right away. In fact, I'm nearly 6 feet tall, and I'm a very tall Christian gal who had never even met a Jewish person in my entire life, and he was and is about 5'8". And a Jewish boy.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, a few weeks after school started, he came out of his dorm room. And we were just, at this point, buddies. And he came out of his dorm room wearing a suit and tie. And I was like, why are you so fancy? And he said, I'm going to services. And I was like, what do you mean services? And he said, it's Rosh Hashanah. And I was like, Russia what now? I'd never even heard of that. And so I not only did I marry about the boy across the hall, but I also married the first Jewish person that I had met.
Great.
And so we became friends and we became best friends, and we were in the same, what the kids nowadays call a friend group. We were in the same friend group, and we would be
Yeah,
sitting
yeah.
at, a big table having dinner together in the dorm. And like, we would just like the jokes that we would say, like it just became clear that we had a kind of like simpatico that was different than other people in the group. But it was a long, slow burn. I think then he kind of fell for me before I fell for him, because I think the thing that was most helpful to me, frankly, was taking a women's studies class and starting to like deconstruct all the ways that gender role socialization affects how we perceive romantic partnership. Because I was like, I can't fall in love with somebody who's shorter than me. I'm a girl. He's a boy. Boys are taller than girls, And it was like, in that class, I was
Yes.
like, wait a minute. What if anything's possible? What if you just fall in love with somebody because you fall in love with them? So there's a ton of permission. And he really has been like the most incredible partner to me over many, many years. I think the thing that I hold most sacred about our relationship is that he never won. Like he is always like, be bigger, do more, like don't be afraid. Like he never once has clipped my wings and not be, like just it has always been
Uh-huh.
like, yes, write a book, yes, write another book, yes, launch a podcast. Yeah, like just always been like my biggest cheerleader. And when I have a
And
moment,
not threatened by your
not
success
threatened
either. That's
by it,
great.
no, and just like
Yeah.
freaking go. And
Uh-huh.
when I have a really difficult, I don't know, media thing or a really difficult clinical thing I'm working on, he'll be like, Al, you were built for this. Like my favorite thing he says, you were built for this. Like
Uh-huh.
it's just such a reminder of like, you've got this. So
Uh-huh.
yeah,
Love it.
yeah.
That's great. That's great. So you teach at Northwestern University, and one of your most popular classes that you teach is Marriage 101. I'd love to enroll in that class if I wasn't married yet. I am assuming it's those looking for marriage are enrolling in that one. Tell me, what do you teach in that class? What do you cover, and why is it so popular?
Yeah. This spring, in fact, my next job after you and I wrap up is getting my training session ready. So I have 12 teaching assistants that help me make this class go. And the teaching assistants are graduate students in the marriage and family therapy program at Northwestern. So it's a pretty cool because they're kind of wrapping up their training. They're about to step out into the world as therapists. And so we've got, we'll have 110 undergraduate students who we guide through a relationship and sexuality education curriculum that I've developed and refined over 20, this will be my 24th year teaching it. So I've been teaching it for longer than I've been a mom. I've been teaching it for
Uh-huh.
basically the same number of years that I've been a wife. Like it's been just part
Uh-huh.
of my world forever. And the curriculum has grown and changed. I do think initially it was students who wanted to get married. In fact, in the early days, we oftentimes had engaged couples enrolling in the class because the age of entry into marriage in the year 2000 was, nearly
A lot.
10 years younger.
Yeah.
So
Right, right.
nowadays we don't have, I haven't had an engaged student for a very long time, but there are students, the class has a reputation, it's been featured in media all over the world for many, many, many years. So people have heard of the class. And so people are just like, yeah, I wanted to be here because I want to learn about it. I mean, that time of life, 20, 21, 22, is just so ripe for all kinds of questions about not just who am I, but who is my family? This whole time of like sort of differentiating from your family of origin, seeing your parents as people, and figuring out what you want for partnership. So I think my favorite part of the class is that I will have in one lecture hall students who are incredibly conservative, fundamentalist or incredibly religiously conservative, where sex outside of marriage is anathema, sitting next to somebody who is like polyamorous, sitting next to somebody who is, genderqueer, and somebody else who's involved in the kink community, somebody else who has been engaged to or has been dating the same person since 8th grade. Like it's just where the students are coming in is so different. So I've had to develop and refine a curriculum that helps every single student feel as belonging in that space as every other student, which keeps me on my toes around, okay, so what is elemental here? What is the journey of what I call relational self-awareness? That's kind of that becomes my anchor, because then it's not about should, shouldn't, right, wrong, here's what marriage looks like. It's like, figure yourself out so that you know how to love and be loved in a way that brings out your best you, your favorite you.
That's great. And I want to talk to you more about relational self-awareness. And then you also, go a little further and talk about sexual self-awareness. Tell me, what are those concepts? What do you mean by those concepts?
Relational self-awareness is defined as an ongoing, curious and compassionate relationship that we develop with ourselves that then becomes the sturdiest foundation for intimate partnership. So it is that willingness again and again to look at ourselves in the mirror rather than placing our dissatisfaction or our frustration at our partner's feet. It is that willingness to say, okay, what's the me part of it? That's like, call it the golden equation of love. The my stuff plus your stuff equals our stuff. Really looking, as all of the major models of couples therapy do, really looking at the patterns, the dances, the sequences, the cycles, like really understanding that there's stuff inside of me, stuff inside of my partner, and then it is the interplay of those that creates the dynamic. And it really it's a way of inviting and challenging people out of more simplistic notions of right and wrong and good and bad in relationship, and really helping people create ever more capacity to hold on to paradox and to tolerate mystery, just, to kind of like resist the urge to like look for the easy answer.
I love that. That's a very deep answer, and I can probably deconstruct that for the rest of our time together today. Is there research that backs up this idea that we can often see our partner's minds much more clearly than our own? It's a lot harder for us to, like what you said, be more self-aware of what's going on internally relative to seeing like, your spouse and where they're messed up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What makes me think, the first thing it makes me think about is what psychology calls the fundamental attribution error, which is that, so that idea that.
But explain it.
This idea that if you do something that is thoughtless.
Wrong.
Yeah. Let's call it thoughtless. I try to avoid right, wrong.
Thoughtless.
But yeah.
I like that better.
Thoughtless. Then my story is very likely he did that because he just is kind of a careless person. Like my story is going to be that it was a trait-based reason that you did that.
Right.
Whereas if I did that thing, the thoughtless thing, it's because I'm having a very busy day, or it's like it's a contextual, it's a state-based thing. It's that I'm in a difficult moment. So we tend to, our default setting is to cut ourselves more slack than we cut the people around us. So that's one, I think, kind of place where the research would orient us. But the other place is just, there's a group of researchers, Doug Schneider and Jay LeBeau, a third guy, God love him, can't remember his name, but a third colleague of theirs who looked across all the major models of couples therapy, and they did something called common factors, like looking for, okay, so what is the difference between Gottman's approach and Sue Johnson's approach and the behavioral couples therapist approach and the insight-oriented couples, it's kind of looking across all these different orientations that have developed in the field of couples therapy. And they found some things that are really the common factors across these models. And one is that every approach to couples therapy has a way of helping partners shift out of that blame shame stance. This happened either because I'm bad or because you're bad, and has a way of helping couples really start to see the bigger picture of the dynamics, that systemic thinking, really framing it in terms of patterns and cycles. So every approach has a way of doing that. And I think that's because our default tendency is just to say, yeah, but I only did that because you did that, or why'd you do that? Or what's wrong with you? Or men shouldn't do that. Or my friend said you shouldn't have done that. Or my therapist said you shouldn't have done that,
Do you have a story from your own marriage or a couple that you worked with where they experienced that very thing?
My favorite story about it is when Barack and Michelle Obama went to couples therapy. Michelle Obama wrote about this in her book, Becoming. The two of them went to couples therapy and sat down at the first session, and Michelle was really so excited to be there because she was really sure that she and the couples therapist were going to help, that the couples therapist was going to help her explain to Barack, right? He's pointing, explain to Barack, the ways that he's a good partner, but kind of falling short. And so she had her world rocked when the therapist started to invite her to look at, her contribution to the dynamic. And that was like my favorite story ever, because it's every single couple I've ever worked with in my practice that is like the shock and awe and horror of couples therapy. It's like, wait a minute, I'm here, so you help me build this case to my partner about what they're doing
You're
wrong.
supposed to fix them, not me.
What the hell is going on here? This is some baloney. So.
And that's so true. We always contribute to the dynamic. And that comes back to systems theory, right? Marriage is an intimate marriage, I should clarify, is a system. So what we do affects the other person and vice versa. So it would make sense that we always kind of co-construct, whether passively or, overtly, the dynamic we have.
Yeah, which is not to say that we ought to beat ourselves up at all. In fact, it's quite empowering. And I think so often we miss that systemic framing, not because we're trying to be stubborn and blamey. I think sometimes it happens, frankly, because we have a family of origin wound where we felt so deeply unseen, so invisible, that we can't possibly imagine that our behavior has the power to change somebody else. So there's something about being then in a marriage where you suddenly, where you have to reckon with the fact that you are so seen, you are so relevant, your voice matters so much, in fact, that you have the power to create the conditions whereby your partner shuts down. You have the power to create the conditions whereby your partner feels, brokenhearted on the inside. Like, I think for some people, it's their wound, in fact, that keeps them from being able to feel and notice and know the power that they have in their relationship.
That's so good. So I've read your recent book, Love Every Day. It's a book divided as it's super digestible, maybe a page and a half at most, usually half a page for every day of the year, except I think we're off the hook on leap day this year.
That's true. You get a day off.
I know, right?
That's
I get a day
funny.
off. But I love it because and you divide it across, I think, 8 different categories of parts of a relationship. One thing you bring up a lot is core wound, and it's a capital C, capital W. Can you explain what core wounds are? Maybe someone that has not really familiar with that concept.
Yeah. It's a way, the idea of a core wound is a way of helping us understand that we bring emotional baggage into our relationships, into our marriages.
And no one's exempt, right? That's the idea or the theory.
No one's exempt. No, in fact, there's a whole one of the days of the year, the idea is we all bring in emotional baggage. It's the brave ones who are willing to unzip the suitcase, open it up, and see what's in there, And what's in there is lots of stuff that has to do with things that you saw and observed, in your family of origin growing up that shaped what you expect from relationships. What's in there is the person you had to become because your parents were, your attachment figures were unavailable or struggling with addiction or harsh and demanding, whatever it was. It's not about blaming our parents, but it is about understanding that we become who we have to be, when we're young and when we're growing up. So a core wound then is that fear of being blamed, fear of being abandoned, fear of being unsafe, fear of being misunderstood. So whatever that kind of tender spot that primes us to have, a size 10 reaction to a size 1 comment that our partner makes, which does not say that we're wrong. It doesn't mean that we're hypersensitive, but it is a way of saying the size of my reaction is so big. And a little part of me feels like maybe it's bigger than the situation warrants. But rather than shaming myself for having a big reaction, or rather than blaming my partner for doing that thing in the first place, let me get curious about the way in which this moment might be triggered in part by my partner's behavior, but also in part by a tender spot that I developed long before I even knew my partner. The ways in which there's an echo or a resonance.
As you're talking, I couldn't help but think of my list of quote unquote core wounds, I guess, where I overreact probably a 10, on a scale 1 to 10, a 10 reaction to something that could otherwise be just a 1 or a 2.
Do you want to say it out loud?
Yeah, let me think about it for a bit. Like any marriage, I have gridlock issues in my relationship, areas where, for example, my wife wants something and I don't, and we can't have both. That's like a gridlock issue. And often I think part of it's because I'm still immature in the way I'm responding to what it is that I don't want in that. So it's awareness of, oh yeah, that's probably from understanding. Another way to put it is what became adaptive when I was young becomes maladaptive in the wrong context in marriage.
That's right.
So it's recognizing those things.
Yeah, it may have been adaptive in your family growing up to just kind of plant your flag and say, absolutely not, no, I won't, and to kind of, if you're right, to kind of defend at all costs your own sovereignty, where in this marriage, you actually could flex and surrender and let go and accommodate without loss of self, without retribution. Yeah, but that takes some practice, and it's risky, right? It's risky. And I think sometimes we don't even notice that we're doing it. It just feels like how to respond to a demand or how to respond to a difference.
Right. And I think about, like, I'm in a Facebook group. I'm in a few, but with other men, we're like marriage help type ideas.
I love that.
And we're all just peers in this group. And it's so easy to fixate on, oh, well, of course I'm right. Like, my spouse is the one that has it wrong.
Yeah.
It's so easy to fixate in that. That's what we're talking about here, gaining that self-awareness, that relational self-awareness.
Can I just put a big old spotlight on how I really do think that it is revolutionary and essential for cis hetero men to be in community with each other, because
Oh, absolutely.
the ladies are tired, and the number of women who complain to me, like, I'm here for all of this work, but he's not, or I'm light years ahead of him. And I don't know, I'm not saying that that's accurate or true. I think sometimes it's a defense against accountability and responsibility. But for whatever grains of truth there are in the female collective exhaustion, the antidote is for the men to be in community with each other. I know that to like the marrow of my bones, that men supporting men holding up mirrors to men. It's like, for a woman to know that her man is going into community with men for this stuff, it's like aloe, for her, like, weary. So I think it's just huge. Like, I can imagine that is really supportive to your wife to know that you're like kind of checking yourself with other men and, kind of having that commonality and that space. It's really important.
And I believe that to the core too. In fact, this is a little plug. I run a men's group.
Hey.
And it's small. We limit it to about 12 men. And, we meet weekly over Zoom, and I have a curriculum, and it's very action-oriented, coaching-based. But the first night we meet, it's always scary because guys don't hang out with guys, let alone talk about sex and intimacy in their own marriages generally, right? That's a very scary place. But the moment, like usually after that first night, you realize, wait, everyone else in here is just like me. Like, it's okay, I'm normal. And then the floodgates open. And it's so healing for men to be with other men. Now we bond, we connect so well after that.
That's great. Oh, that's great. Wow.
It's needed.
That's wonderful. I'm glad that you're doing that work, and I hope that you will keep doing it, and I'm here to support it for sure.
Great. All right. You talked earlier about when we can develop better relational self-awareness, we have the ability to hold paradoxes. Paradoxes, is that plural for paradox? In our relationships. Can you explain what that means, what some general themes of paradoxes are, and how recognizing those and reconciling those helps us develop better selfhood and better marriages?
Yeah. Actually, I posted this on Instagram a couple of days ago, so it's fresh for me. So a paradox is what also I call like a both and, like this is true and this is true. Rather than collapsing, there's only kind of one, single story that is true and real for me. So I mentioned that I've been married to Mr. Todd Solomon for a very long time, and we are empty nesters, and I am blown away by the amount of space that I need right now, the amount of alone time, my limited capacity, like my sort of like craving of space and my limited capacity for a whole lot of togetherness. And I think that has to do with the newness of the empty nest and like what an incredibly profound shift that is on me as a person who's been the primary caregiver for so many years. And I know that in my scarier moments, I worry that the amount of alone time I need is a poor prognostic indicator for my marriage, that somehow it says something bad or scary about me or about Todd or about us being at risk of falling apart. And at the same time, I trust that marriages have chapters, and this is a chapter. Like, this is a moment in time. It's not a forever moment, and it's not a total moment, because I'm not saying I want to go live in a cave for myself. I'm just saying I need a lot of space. So the paradox there is I am both frightened and trusting of this moment of my experience, right? Like, I know what's true about my experience. What's true is I need quite a bit of space. But the paradox is I am both concerned and trusting. Like, those are both real, you know?
Right. Good, good. What other paradoxes are there?
I think that's a big one about like kind of that, like I need aloneness and I need togetherness. Like, I think that's another
Right.
paradox.
Autonomy and attachment.
Yes,
Is another way of saying.
for sure.
I've heard
That's
that.
right.
Uh-huh.
That's right.
Mhm.
Yeah. Esther Perel blew us all away with the paradox of needing
Love and desire.
Yeah, right.
Uh-huh.
Needing like novelty and consistency. That's another really big one, like that we need both. And the need for, I think what scares us, I think craving novelty is scary. How do I crave novelty within a long-term relationship? Well, there are ways of reimagining and re-experiencing something with your same partner, et cetera, et cetera.
Mhm.
And then, so there's oftentimes like I think because the paradox feels frightening, we want to kind of collapse it and have only one thing be true.
Usually the safety side of that equation wins.
Right. That's right. That's
Uh-huh.
right. That's right.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then you say, why is my marriage so boring? So let's double click on this a bit. Let's zoom in a little on this more. How have you seen couples navigate this? I love in your book, you have a whole section on monogamy doesn't need to be boring. How do we navigate this? Because most of these podcast listeners are monogamous couples. How do they create more of that erotic desire, cultivate that in their relationship?
Yeah.
Within the context of the security of monogamy.
Right. I do. I mean, I think some of it is like creating a relationship where you can step away from each other and have experiences that are separate, have travel that is separate, have community, have friend experiences that are separate, like being able to step away, because then that's not a new experience with your partner necessarily, but it's a new experience of yourself. It's a restorative experience of yourself. It's an enlivening experience of yourself that then allows you to return home to your partner with fresh stories to tell, with a fresh kind of experience of yourself, because you experienced yourself in this context. And so you bring home, a little bit of an elevated, energized version of yourself. I think that's one of the key ones. And then it also is for couples to create, to put themselves together in some novel experiences or growth promoting experiences or learning experiences together. I think travel is an easy one. I think travel is a really actually wonderful one. Like that whole idea of seeing something new together, I think is really important for couples. I think it's also, a lot of couples report that like hotel sex or, sex away from home is like just being in a different bed in a different setting where you don't have laundry in the same room as your bed. Just all of that can feel enlivening. And I know that's not always feasible time-wise and money-wise for couples, but whatever elements of like, let's do something different together, which is it's a hard ask for couples, I know, but it is a worthwhile endeavor, right? It needs to be effortful. There does need to be some effort put in to create the conditions to have a new experience of the same person.
That's great. I loved your tip about taking some alone time. Maybe like going out with friends one night or whatever, going on a trip by yourself. Yet a lot of people feel guilt about leaving home or leaving the other with the kids or whatever. How do you counsel individuals over that? Now, I can tell you why I'm asking.
Yeah.
It's the number one reason why I don't think men want to join the men's group isn't because they don't see value in it. It isn't because they can't afford it, but it's they feel guilty taking some time for themselves.
Aww.
One night a week. Because they're usually at home, joining us from Zoom.
Right.
They want to be the guy. They want to be a good husband. They want to help with bedtime and homework. And here they are stepping away from that to do something that looks kind of selfish, on the surface.
Oh, I think that's a really important reminder to share because it definitely, it challenges, I think, a stereotypic, inaccurate, heterosexual idea that, husbands and men are looking for any excuse to get out of stuff. So I think that the truth that you are sharing and reminding all of us is not, it's not true and it's inaccurate. And men are very worried about coming up short. I mean, I think if there's one thing I've seen over and over and over again in my practice, which is made up mostly of cis hetero couples, is men's deep fear and deep anguish around being perceived as a disappointment to their spouse. It's really painful
Right.
to look in your wife's eyes and see disappointment. I think there's few things that men hate more than that feeling of not measuring up, or feeling like they don't even know what to do in order to measure up. I know it's exquisitely painful for all of us, but I think it's something that we miss and don't focus on nearly enough around men.
Yes.
Yeah.
You mentioned that on a podcast of yours I listened to recently about, and I agree 100%.
You do.
A lot of men think a lot about how their wives perceive them. How am I being perceived? How am I being perceived? It's even during sex, how am I being perceived right now? It is a dominant thought.
Yep, it's a dominant thought, and I think women tend to be either unaware of that or have a hard time even imagining that, because I think men also develop really good covers sometimes for acting like that's not what, it can be hard to see. Masking it. And I think that then, when she does become aware of it, she's got to tolerate the heaviness of it, right? Like the kind of responsibility of it, of the truth of that in a way that is difficult, right? Like to be able to feel that powerful and that influential can feel like a burden also, right? So it has to be like really kind of worked about how do you matter? How do you let yourself matter without it then becoming a responsibility that, that then sends you into guilt or, self-abandonment or biting your tongue, et cetera.
Right. I'm personally a fan of differentiation theory. And in that too, the men, or because we're talking about this for men, but they have an opportunity here to realize maybe you're being too dependent on your wife's validation. That's in an unhealthy way in that situation too.
Yeah.
Or whatever. There's different ways to look at it, of course, but you can take that into account.
I agree. And I think I love that idea of you working with men along those lines, because you're helping, differentiation isn't shutting down. It's not shutting down and saying F you. It is saying I can sit in that paradox, right? Of validating not being wholly dependent on you as my oxygen mask, and still knowing that, of course your view of me matters.
Yes. Yeah, it's that living in that tension better. That's what it is.
Living in that tension better. Yeah.
Because you never collapse it, or you don't want to collapse it. As we close, I've got one more question. I love your book, the Love Everyday book, because you say this needs to be a practice. This is your advice. Make this a practice. Make it a meditation, something you journal about, something you share with a friend about. Can you talk a little bit about the power of stillness, about creating that space for yourself, time to reflect and kind of ponder?
Yeah. I think changing patterns, it takes time and practice. It's not a light switch. And there's only a particular pace that we can go. I think sometimes when people discover therapy or self-work or relational work, they want to just put the pedal to the metal and just feel different right now. And there are limits to how much we can take in at any moment, which is, I think, also why I like the format of the new book, is it is those daily doses, because it's hard stuff and you can't take in, it's like a sponge. You can only take in so much, every day. And so I think the practice of building into your day a little bit of time to read the passage for Love Every Day, or a little bit of time to talk with your partner about it. That's just that daily dose. It doesn't have to be. There are times I've had couples where I've been okay, stop. Too much relational talk. I don't want you talking about your relationship 2 hours a day, every day. I'm a therapist and I can't do that in my own relationship, in my own life. And I like talking about this stuff. So I think for some couples, it's having a practice so that they can be still and in conversation together. And for some couples, it's a way of saying, okay, it's only one page. You're only doing one page today. You're not solving all of the problems of this marriage in one day. But I think it's a different quality of how we are with ourselves and each other when we are stepping out of the daily life to either read a page of the book or listen to a podcast or go to a therapy session. Like there is that need for like stillness and like shifting into another mode in the service of our healing.
Great. Very good. Let's say you're a couple, they've bought your book, they recognize we learn line upon line, precept upon precept, and they're doing the little dose every day, and they're growing, they're connecting better, they're understanding better, they're regulating themselves better, and kind of like what you said, they have that better self-awareness. Now they're healthy. What would be your black belt sex tip to take where they are at baseline to their next level?
Black belt sex tip.
Black belt, yep.
I don't know. I mean, I wrote a whole book about sex. It's called Taking Sexy Back. Maybe the black belt sex tip is just, I think the greatest sex happens when we like step out of any idea of how it should look and really just embrace presence and togetherness, and that just the sex that really like helps both people feel good, knowing that good this week may look really different than good next week and next year and last year. And, that, so I think the black belt is just like kind of entering every sexual experience with kind of like a beginner's mind, of just like, I'm here for you and with you, and let's see where we go.
I love that. That's great. Thank you. Where can people go to learn more about you and your books and what you offer?
I think the easiest place is the website, dralexandrasolomon.com. And that has got links to all the social media, links to my weekly podcast, which is called Reimagining Love, hundreds of blogs that you've got a drop-down menu. You can filter and find what you're looking for. Books. There's 3 books. There's a bunch of e-courses, lots of ways of connecting with me and the work that my team and I are doing.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Dan. It was great to be with you.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you're interested in accelerating growth in your marriage, either sexually, emotionally, or spiritually, I want to invite you to work with me in my affordable coaching program called Next Level. More information about Next Level and my fun and sexy apps for couples are available at getyourmarriageon.com. Please also don't forget to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss a single episode. And be sure to tell your married friends. I promise, they will thank you for life. Now go get your marriage on.